Hello everyone, I'm Corey Mitchell with TradeThatSwing.com, and in this video we're going to look at the best Bitcoin ETFs in Canada. This article is the 2024 version, but it does get updated. I update this article every month to 2 months just to make sure that the rankings are, the same as they were before, or if they change. And if you're ever wondering where this article is to see the latest update, go to TradeThatSwing.com and just type in Bitcoin ETFs in the search box and you'll see this article come up. Bitcoin's the most popular cryptocurrency. It's the largest in terms of its market cap, which is just coins out there multiplied by the price. There are 19.6 million in circulation, and the number of Bitcoins is capped at 21 million. So after that, no more are created. So it is a finite supply, which is what some people like about it. It's not like the government who can just continually print money when they want to. Bitcoin has a limited supply. It's also good for investors, as I mentioned at the top of this article here. Why would you buy an ETF instead of just buying actual Bitcoin in your crypto wallet or on a crypto exchange? Well, you can buy it inside a tax-free savings account or an RRSP or just your normal stock account, and that's why the ETFs are attractive for people who want to own it inside these tax-protected accounts or who just don't want to do anything with crypto or crypto exchanges. This basically allows them just to buy inside their stock accounts and still have the exposure to Bitcoin. Before we go any further, note that Bitcoin is very volatile. We mostly hear about the big rallies, but there are also big declines. 70 to 80% declines after these big rallies is the norm. And we recently had in 2022 almost 80% decline, and then since 2023 we've been rallying back up, and currently this chart was updated March 8th. I'm recording this on March 22nd, and we've been kind of whipsawing these old highs here around 69,000. So nice run up again, 350% plus, but had an 80% decline right before that. So just be aware of the volatility if you're going to be invested in this for the long term. And if you're looking to trade short term, well, there's potentially lots of movement to capitalize on as well. So let's get to it. The top Bitcoin ETFs in Canada, and the ranking is very simple. I'm looking mainly at performance and the management expense ratio. A management expense ratio is how much it costs or how much basically you lose each year because of the costs of running the fund. Now, the cost of running the fund includes everything they have to do to make the trades, running the business, and then there's also a management fee, which is what the managers or basically the ETF business owners make in exchange for providing us with this service. So they're not just doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, they are getting paid for it. So we want to keep that fee as low as possible because that means more money in our pocket, more money that gets to compound the next year. If you lose a big chunk because of a high management expense ratio, you have less money going into the next year. So it just compounds a little bit less than if we had a lower expense ratio. Just obviously lower fees are better. So we have a couple different choices for the 6 that I have ranked here, and we're going to quickly go over which one you'd want to buy. So let's look at our first choice, CI Galaxy Bitcoin ETF. We have 2 symbols, BTCX. They're both BTCX, but one is .B and the other one is .U. And they both trade. The TO is on all of these ETFs we're going to look at. They trade on the Toronto Stock Exchange. So what's the difference between B and .U? One's priced in Canadian dollars and the other's priced in US dollars. If you have a Canadian dollar RRSP, TSFA, or just a Canadian dollar trading account you want to buy these ETFs in, I would buy the Canadian dollar one, the .B. The US dollar one is better if you have a US dollar based trading account, RRSP or TSFA. as soon as you switch a currency, so if you have a Canadian dollar account, but you buy this .U one, now a currency exchange happens where your Canadian dollars get converted to US dollars in order to buy this US dollar priced ETF. And your bank's brokerages typically charge about 2 to 3% for that transaction. It's hidden, but it's there. And then you're going to pay that on the exit as well. So you're getting dinged on both sides of the transaction when you don't need to be. So if you have a Canadian dollar account, stick with Canadian dollars. If you have a US dollar account, stick with US dollars. That fee is hidden because they don't necessarily disclose like, oh, you're going to pay 2 to 3% for this. What happens is they'll give you an exchange rate. So they're going to say, we're converting your Canadian dollars into US dollars at this rate in order to buy this number of shares or whatever. If you compare that exchange rate they give you and you just go on Google or Yahoo Finance or whatever and type in the US dollar CAD rate, you'll see it is very different, about 2 to 3% different. So they're giving you a worse rate than what is available in the actual currency market. And then they're going to get you on the other side as well. So you're paying about, up to 6% of your whatever amount you put in there. You're just kind of losing right off the bat via the entry and the exit. So that's why we don't want to swap the currencies. If your Canadian dollar account, use Canadian dollars, the .B. So those are the stats, the management expense ratio. This is the smallest, so that's why I like it. Full disclosure, I own this one. I own it not because I ranked it first. I like it, and I think it's the best choice, and that's why I own it, and that's why it's ranked first. And you'll see it has generally the best performance and the lowest management expense ratio. If we move to the next one, Fidelity Advantage Bitcoin, we just have a little bit higher expense ratio, a little bit lower performance. So, why would I pick this one? They're doing the exact same thing. They're both tracking the price of Bitcoin. One's going to do it maybe a little bit better because it has a lower management fee. Over time, the higher the management fee, then we're just losing percentages on what Bitcoin does, so we end up with lower returns the higher the management fee. So again, we have the same options. FBTC is the Canadian dollar one. .U is the US dollar one. Stick to Canadian dollars if you have a Canadian dollar account. US dollars if you have a US dollar account. These are all pretty much the same. You can see the management expense ratios are just getting higher. That's why they're further down the list. I would not be interested in trading any of these just because of, why pay more for the same thing? This one has the Canadian dollar option and the US dollar options like the other one, BTCC.B and .U. This one also has another option, and it is a hedged version, which means you buy it in Canadian dollars, but it hedges out any US dollar price fluctuations because Bitcoin is priced in US, at least how they're buying them. So they're buying Bitcoin in US dollars inside the ETF. So you're buying that ETF in Canadian dollars, but what they're doing inside the fund is based in US dollars. What the hedging does is it eliminates that US dollar exposure. So in these Canadian funds, what the return ends up being, all of these other ones, with the Canadian dollar funds, is you basically end up with a mixture of how Bitcoin did in addition to how well did the US dollar do versus the Canadian dollar. So it's basically a fusion of those two things. What hedging does is just eliminates that currency side of the equation, so you're just getting the Bitcoin returns on their own without being affected by currency fluctuations inside the ETF. Remember, if you're paying Canadian dollars, you're just paying Canadian dollars, and that ETF is priced in Canadian dollars. But what's happening inside the fund may be exposed to these currency fluctuations because of being priced in US dollars. So that's an additional thing. If that interests you, this would be basically the first choice if you wanted a hedged one, because our top two choices don't have hedging. But if you wanted hedging, you're going to pay a little bit higher price for it, higher management expense ratio. These ones, just expense ratios are getting higher, returns getting a little bit lower as a result. Canadian dollar and US dollar versions, BTCQ for the IQ CoinShares Bitcoin ETF. Fifth choice, Evolve Bitcoin ETF, trades under two symbols, EBIT and EBIT.U for Canadian and US dollars. Again, higher expense ratios. Now, the final one is a little bit different. The Purpose Bitcoin Yield ETF trades under BTCY, and you can see three options here. .TO, that's a hedged version. We talked about what hedging is. .B is just Canadian dollars, and .U is priced in US dollars. So if you're wanting some hedging, and you have a Canadian dollar account, you can go with this BTCY one. If you wanted Canadian dollars and you might have a bit of a currency exposure in there, which naturally happens, BTCY.B would also be good if you have Canadian dollars. Management expense ratio, a little bit lower than some of these other ones, but why this is at the bottom of the list is the return. So 140% including dividends. So this one pays a dividend. That's why it's called a Bitcoin Yield ETF. It's giving you a yield on your money. Bitcoin does not pay a dividend. So they had to create a strategy that creates this dividend. This fluctuates dramatically. So right when I wrote this article, 8%, but this has fluctuated dramatically over the year or so I've been updating this article. So it's not a constant yield. And how they're generating it is they own a bunch of Bitcoin. To generate the yield, they write something called call options on these Bitcoins that they own. When you write an option, you receive a premium. Basically a fee for writing this option. But it's giving the buyer the right to take your Bitcoin or buy it when a certain level is hit. So what happens is if the price really rises, the ETF is benefiting from this increasing price. They're also getting these premiums, but if the price continues to rise, these options get called in and people basically get to take their Bitcoin. So the end result of this is that basically the returns have been lower, but it offers a yield. So there's a little bit of discussion here if you want to know basically what a covered call is. That's the strategy that they're using. If you wanted to look it up, you could look up covered calls. That's the strategy. And 140%, still a nice return, including your dividends. But if we go up to these other ones, they were 194 to 197%. So we've given up a lot for that, little bit of dividend income. So just something to be aware of if you like that idea of some yield. Maybe this is an option for you. What I would prefer to do is just buy one of the other ETFs and just give yourself a little bit of, if you want to invest in this for income, then just pull out your little bit per year. You're getting a higher return with the other ones generally. So I would rather invest in those, the lower management expense ratios, and then basically just pay yourself if you need some income. The rest of the article talks about the advantages of buying in a TSFA, you're likely aware of those. TSFAs, if you buy a Bitcoin ETF, you get no tax break now, but you never pay taxes in the future on those gains. In an RRSP, you do get a tax break now. You basically get a tax deduction for what the money you put into your RRSP, and then you can invest it how you want, like buying Bitcoin ETFs. But when you pull that money out, you will pay tax. So a little bit of a trade-off there. You have those choices. I use both. I think they're both good vehicles, so I'd recommend using both. And this talks a little bit about overall portfolio allocation. 100% invested in Bitcoin may not be good for everybody. So you might also want to consider owning some stock ETFs, some bond ETFs, commodities, cryptocurrencies, alternative assets. Alternative assets are a house is a good example of an alternative asset, plus trading cards, comics, any of those kind of things, diamonds, gold. Risks of Bitcoin ETFs, we'll just touch on these briefly. The main one is the big volatility. You have these big up and down moves. Just be aware of that before you invest. You're also paying a management fee for something you could do yourself. You could just own Bitcoin buy it on an exchange and then have it in your crypto wallet. And there's no management fee for that. You will pay, some transaction costs to buy it, but that's basically it, no management fee. So you are paying someone to do something you could do yourself, but again, you won't be able to own Bitcoin inside your tax-protected accounts, whereas with an ETF, you can. Bitcoin allows you to make purchases. With an ETF, obviously you can't do that. You can't send Bitcoin to someone else or receive Bitcoin or pay online for something. Bitcoin is a currency, so you lose that benefit when you're trading in an ETF. Some of these other ones, very remote chance, but that ETF is holding Bitcoins on its hard wallet. That's basically a digital wallet off internet, off computer. It's stored somewhere, and that potentially could get stolen, hacked. An employee could run off with it. Very remote, but it could happen. So just to be aware of that. And Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are in their infancy. Laws, regulations are being updated around the world. There's always some news about some country either banning it or banning certain exchanges, and other countries are trying to adopt it more heavily. So there's this inflow of good news and bad news as regulators and countries try to figure out how they're going to navigate this world of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And basically that relates to this other issue of the volatility. So we continue to get these big up moves and down moves, not necessarily always specifically related to news, but just these cryptocurrencies are finding their ground in the economy, and it creates volatility until they kind of find a more stable part of the economy. So things to be aware of. So that is your top ranking ETFs in Canada. And just as a quick recap, there they are there. And the top choice is the CI Galaxy Digital Bitcoin ETF, BTCX ticker symbol.